So this is my company. I lead bird watching tours, nature tours to the company, but I'm not really here to advertise today. I'm just here to talk about woodpeckers. But I have one other big subject I want to talk about. But if you need to get in touch with me, just go to the website. Okay, you can email me from there. Easy to remember. Okay. I know Tatiana didn't want me to thank her, but Tatiana set this whole thing up. And she invited me, and she put it all together in like 2 weeks. So I appreciate it very much. I appreciate Bernardo hosting me. It's an honor to be here, Black. It's an honor to be here. And if you like this talk, maybe I'll come again and do another one. Okay. So, the other subject I have for you today is just an invitation. My fiance, Promisa? Promisa Lisi Martinez? Uh-oh, she's going to turn shy. We live in Jalisco. Okay? And this is an open invitation to all of you. Okay? Not at the same time. But I really want you to consider come visiting us. Okay? It's an easy flight. We're on the west side of Jalisco, right here. In an area we call Cabo Corrientes. This is Cabo Corrientes, Valle de Banderas. Fly in here. We live just outside the town of El Tuito. Okay, just 10 minutes from El Tuito. The ranch is called Rancho Primavera. There's lots of open space, trails to hike in the woods, lots of water on the property. We have Tuito plus ponds. This is at the Santa Monica part of the property. And bird watchers from all over the world know Rancho Primavera. Because, are any of you on eBird? Yeah? A few of you? Okay, eBird is this thing where people keep track of all the birds they saw. And bird watchers all over the world, many thousands, maybe tens of thousands, muy bien. They get on this website to see where the best birding is. And when you go to look at Mexico, Rancho Primavera is the #1 birding spot in Jalisco. And it's like number 7 or 8 in all of Mexico. Okay? So hay 80 hectares. 300 especies. 22 West Mexican endemics. Now I'm speaking to some people who know what endemic means, right? Yep. Okay, good. If I use language that you don't understand, please ask, okay? And 36 endemic subspecies. And one of those endemics is the black-throated magpie jay. And you get an example here of the map. The Sierra Madre Occidental runs up, we're going to place it, runs right up here. Okay, and so this is a mountain bird here, but then it comes down all the way to the coast, all the way to Cabo Corrientes here. But that's not our only endemic. We have the Mexican hermit, extremely limited range, visits the feeders. The citrulline trogon. There are lots of trogons in Mexico, lots. But this is the only endemic trogon. Okay, and again, you can see that map. Pacific slope. Okay, they're actually more common down by the coast than they are at the ranch, but we have residents on the ranch. The gray-crowned woodpecker, and this picture is not upside down. The bird is upside down, clinging to the underside of the branch. We're going to talk some more about how that bird does that. Just notice the tail and the feet. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Again, look at the range map. Sierra Madre Occidental, the west volcanic belt all the way down to the Sierra Sur of Oaxaca. Maybe you'd like to see that bird. It's like a popsicle. How much do you say popsicle? Looks like a popsicle. Another one that comes almost to Mexico City, a little bit in Estado de Mexico, but pretty common out here where we are. Another one, the yellow-winged cacique, comes a little bit out into volcanic belt here. Red-breasted chat. Another one that almost comes out to Mexico City. Flammulated flycatcher is a coastal dry forest specialty. And if you don't like birds, or if you like other things besides birds, we have lots of wildlife. It's a naturalist's heaven. Okay? The Mexican pink tarantula. The dwarf Mexican tree frog. And the giant Mexican tree frog. That guy's about as big as my fist. Pretty big for a frog. Cascabel. This is our main venomous snake. We have coral snakes, but this is the most venomous of our snakes. But what a gorgeous animal to get to see. This is a ceiba borer, boring into trees. A big beetle we saw recently, probably about that big. Wow. And this is a pale kite swallowtail butterfly. And a lot of these are also West Mexican specialties. This blue mark, black patch blue mark, you need to come to the West to see that, just like several of those other species. And if you like plants, we got plants too, besides all the animals. We've got rare bromeliads. And a couple of really rare flowers. This one on the left was just described maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And this is our little town, Tuito, very quiet, not very touristy at all, especially considering 90 minutes from Puerto Vallarta. Seafood, great fresh seafood. We're 1 hour from the coast. We have cabañas and guest rooms. This was a group of Amazilias. I don't know if everybody knows what the Amazilias are. It's a group of women birders in Mexico. Anyway, you should be part of the Amazilias. You can talk to Lizzie about that later. And there's a lot to do in Cabo Corrientes. There are rivers. It's very rugged terrain. And it's one of the places in Mexico where the pine forest comes the closest to the coast. So we have pine forest up here, mixed semi-deciduous forest here, and thorn forest here. And that's how we get that diversity of birds and other wildlife. But each of these red spots, those are all places we can take you if you come visit. Just 90 minutes south of the airport. Okay? And we'll come pick you up. You don't need a car. It's a beautiful place. It's hard to describe, but it's got, and the birding there is relatively easy. So it's not all jungle birding. Lots of open space like this where we walk around the edges of pastures. So again, if you want information on Rancho Primavera, just go to my website. Okay? Let's talk about woodpeckers. All right? This is my favorite subject. And I also want to thank Danny for introducing us to Ulises, who took us out to go see Strickland's woodpecker yesterday, day before yesterday. This was the main reason we came to Mexico City, was to see the Strickland's woodpecker. This is a very limited range, endemic, Mexican endemic woodpecker. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are about 6 endemic woodpeckers, maybe 5 in Mexico. And this is one of them. And you pretty much have to come here. There's a little bit another population to the east, to the west, but this is the best place to come see the Strickland's woodpecker. So we saw them. I was pretty excited. That was a new bird for me. We found these, a couple of them. They really like these pine cones, and I think they bore into the pine cone. They hammer into the pine cone to eat the seeds. And you can see these pine cones have been chipped away here. So I do like woodpeckers. Some people say I'm obsessed with woodpeckers. I prefer to say I'm just a woodpecker fanatic. Okay? I lived in a place in Oregon, north of California, where we had 11 species of woodpeckers nesting in a very small area, and that's pretty rare. Even here, it's hard to find that in Mexico because everything's more spread out. And I fell in love with woodpeckers and started doing research, and eventually wrote the book on North American woodpeckers. And today, I'm giving you my favorite woodpecker talk. Anytime anybody asks me to do a woodpecker talk, my first recommendation is woodpecker anatomy. Okay? I know some of you or most of you are scientists, so you're gonna be woodpecker fans after this. Okay? So woodpeckers have this amazing ability to hammer their heads on trees. This is the pale-billed woodpecker. This is right outside the guest rooms at Rancho Primavera. They do that for feeding, like the pale-billed was, but they also do it for nesting. And they make these cavities in trees, and most of them start fresh on the outside of the tree and excavate. And they have to go in, they get the wood chips, they chip a little more, and they come back out and they go in a little bit more. Now look, you can see the tail. That bird's gone in upside down. That's a lot of work. Okay? And it's hard to understand unless you can see the graphic. This is an actual woodpecker nest that was excavated by a sapsucker like that last one. That was actually a hybrid sapsucker. I know you have red-naped sapsucker and Williamson's and yellow-bellied come into Mexico. But that was a red-naped, red-breasted hybrid. This is a red-naped sapsucker nest, and you can see how that bird starts right here. It has to go in upside down, get those chips back out of there, throw those chips out, wood chips, and eventually it can get in and turn around. And it leaves wood chips in the bottom for the eggs. Okay, it doesn't carry nesting material. It doesn't carry grass or leaves or anything into the nest. It just chips at the wall of the cavity, and the chips go to the bottom. The chips also help absorb fecal material. Okay, so those babies in there are pooping, right? Because babies poop, and when they're real young, they poop in these nice, neat little bags called fecal sacs. Okay, but as they get older, they start smooshing those fecal sacs, and the wood chips in the bottom of the nest help absorb the fecal material and make it easier for the adult to clean the nest. So, why don't woodpeckers get headaches when they slam their heads against trees? I'm going to tell you. So does anybody recognize this? Just shout it out. What does that look like?
Whoa.
Good. Big wall. Okay, good. You just shout them out when I ask, okay? Just shout out those names. You can shout them out in Spanish if you want. I'll get it. So that's a brick wall. That's your head. Yeah, I know it looks like my head, but I want you to pretend that it's your head. Okay? And if you hit your head against a brick wall with the same force that a woodpecker does, you would have to be going, oh, I'm sorry, geez, that's millimeters, but 16 miles per hour. Okay? 1,200 G's of force. Okay? A fighter pilot in a fancy military airplane can withstand 9 G's of force. Woodpeckers can withstand 1,200 G. I don't know how to say G. His. 1,200 of force hitting their heads against trees. So the first thing to learn about is the head structure, how the head is put together. When scientists are studying how to make better, safer football helmets and motorcycle helmets, they study woodpeckers. Okay, so that research, when you wear a safe motorcycle helmet, you can thank woodpeckers. Okay? Even electronic engineers, when they're trying to protect their equipment inside a casing, study woodpeckers to try to figure out the best way to minimize shock on their electronic equipment. And the first thing to remember is the cerebrospinal fluid, okay? This is the brain, I think you got that, right? Everybody got the brain? Okay. Need a cup of coffee? No? Okay. This is the brain. And then the cerebrospinal fluid. Humans have a lot of cerebrospinal fluid in their cranium. And our brain is inside that fluid. Woodpeckers have almost no cerebrospinal fluid in their cranium. That holds the brain tightly within the skull. If we hit our heads, for example, with a bat, please don't try this. Okay, it's not safe. But if you hit your head with a bat or get in a car accident, and your brain, because you have all that fluid in there, is going to slosh. Well, that's a tough one to translate. It's going to swim. Because they don't have that cerebrospinal fluid, they don't have the brain moving inside the cranium. They also have special bones. The frontal bone here and the occipital bone, because of those points of impact, are made of a network of bone fibers. And that helps disperse the energy over a wide area. If you were to measure the surface area and the forces that can be absorbed, that's where a lot of that energy is absorbed. Okay? Many woodpeckers also have the frontal overhang. So that's a bone that comes down right here. And I'll show you some more examples of that. So, these are a few of the genera of woodpeckers that you have in Mexico. And I want you to notice the differences. This is a good science question on a test. For me to not tell you the differences, and you tell me the differences. I won't make you tell me. I'll tell you. But just look at it for a second and see if you can tell what the differences are. Okay? The first thing I notice is the nasal openings are different. Right? That's where they breathe. Notice these four have long, skinny nasal openings off to the side. Okay? The other ones have big, open nasal openings. Look at that. This is the same as a pale-billed. Okay? These four in the middle are what we call the heavy excavators. They do the most heavy-duty pounding on trees. So their nasal openings go off to the side and they're thin, so they don't get material, the wood chips, going down in their nasal cavity. Okay? These other guys, here and here, they excavate cavities also, but always in very soft wood. And they often reuse old cavities. So they don't need to excavate their cavities like the other woodpeckers, and they don't feed like the heavy-duty woodpeckers. They feed on the ground and eat ants, or they catch insects, and so they don't need that same protection. Also, I want you to notice the frontal overhangs right here. Okay? These species have no frontal overhang, no frontal overhang. That's an example of those species being weaker excavators, because the frontal overhang hangs over here, and when that woodpecker contacts the surface, there's a special hinge on the jaw, and this frontal overhang directs those forces downward into the torso and away from the cranial cavity. Pretty amazing. So the woodpeckers that are adapted for heavier excavating have their own special adaptations, anatomical adaptations. So here's another example. So I've put just a few of the species here for you to see as an example. We've got like 25 species of woodpecker in Mexico. A good number of them are in the southeast because they're kind of like softwood species. They're not the heavy-duty excavators. And they go all the way around the wet tropics. So where there's a lot of wet wood, there's a lot of woodpeckers. That's easy excavating. Look at the frontal overhangs on those two. Okay, sapsuckers are constantly hammering their heads against trees to make those little sap holes. I'll show you some sap holes in a minute. These guys, almost no frontal overhang. They're generalist feeders, and they often reuse old cavities. Also, this was something I didn't mention on the other slide. Notice the base of the bill, how broad it is on these two and how narrow it is here, and proportionately smaller, shorter bills. Again, that disperses the energy over a wider area to minimize the amount of damage. Okay? If these guys were to do the same thing, those forces would be stronger going straight back because there's less material to absorb the shock. So this hairy woodpecker is an example of one of the heavier duty excavators. Okay, this guy is slamming into a tree. Pay attention to what he's doing here. There's a larval gallery up there. I've slowed it down here a little bit. A larval gallery. You ever heard that term?
Nope.
Okay, watch this. Watch. Wait for it. Wait. Look at that. Okay, a larval gallery is the tunnel in the wood made by a beetle or wasp or whatever kind of larva, what hatched from the adult. The adult will lay its eggs in the bark of the tree, and the eggs hatch, and the larvae bore into the tree. The heavy-duty excavators can bore into the tree themselves and get those prey items out of there. So I want you to think about how he gets that larva out, and I'll show you in a few minutes. There's the hairy's skull. Okay, again, notice the frontal overhang and the nasal openings out to the side. In contrast, one of the generalist feeders, this golden cheek woodpecker, eats a lot of fruit. That's soft and really easy, right? He also eats a lot of stuff on the ground, and he just picks things up wherever he finds it. Okay, he's a generalist, and he's not picky about what he eats. So he's very successful within his range, but he is endemic. But you go anywhere in West Mexico, and you can't miss a golden cheek woodpecker. Okay, they're generalist feeders, and that's part of what makes them so common. And look at that bill. A tiny little frontal overhang and big nasal openings. Okay? A few other things about the skeleton. First, the hyoid bones. We'll talk about those in a minute. That's up here. Okay? And number B, the specialized ribs. Remember what I said about the hinge and the energy going downward and into the torso? There are special ribs that are broader than other birds that have big muscles that attach to the head and neck that give the woodpecker the ability to deliver the blow and then to reabsorb that energy into the torso. Okay? So again, the heavier duty excavators have broader upper ribs than the weaker excavators. But they both have broader ribs than other birds. Then we have the keel right here. Okay? Woodpeckers don't fly a lot. Most of them aren't migratory. So they don't need big flight muscles. In fact, they don't fly very well. They just kind of go from tree to tree, or ground to the tree, or whatever. So they don't need big flight muscles, and they need to get close to the tree, right? So if you had a big keel like a duck or a goose, you wouldn't be able to get close to a tree. So the shallow keel is another adaptation. And the pygostyle, that's a new word for you. That might be a good Scrabble word. You guys play Scrabble?
Yeah.
So somebody else might spell style, and you can put pygo on the end. And they're going to be like, that's not a word. And you look it up and tell them it's pygostyle. What is the pygostyle? That's a set of fused bones at the base of the backbone. And what could those be for? I showed you just briefly on that gray-crowned woodpecker slide. Anybody? Well, there's another. Remember the muscles up here on the torso? There's another set of muscles, big muscles, that attach to the pygostyle and the tail. They control the tail of the woodpecker. In order for the woodpecker to deliver the blows, it has to have 3 points of contact on the tree. 2 here and 1 down below. So the tail presses up against the tree and allows the bird to rear back. And it stays pressed up against the tree. We'll talk about it in more detail in a second. Okay, what are the eyes? That's a lot of force on little gelatinous balls in your head. What happens there? Some of you may be familiar with the Annals of Improbable Research. If you're not, you need to go to this website. Okay? This is a group of scientists who get the Ig Nobel Awards for what might seem silly, but is actually very innovative science. And this guy, Dr. Ivan Schwab, is an ophthalmologist, an eye doctor, at University of California at Davis, and he was able to show why woodpeckers do not get retinal hemorrhages. How do woodpeckers hammer on a tree without their eye pulling away from the back and tearing the retina? How do they do that? It's pretty... Just this alone will make you like woodpeckers. Okay? So, you know most of these parts. The 2 important ones are the choroid and the pecten. Okay? The instant before a woodpecker slams the tree, the choroid and the pecten fill with blood and a mucopolysaccharide to increase the intraocular pressure in the eye to prevent the eye from pulling away at the retina. You got that? Does that make sense? That's pretty amazing. And it does that every time the bird hammers.
So it makes it more tight.
Tight. Exactly. It increases the pressure so the eye kind of holds stiff in the optical cavity, what do they call that? Orbital socket. The orbital socket. So that it won't pull back from the retina.
Even when the species that hammer just a lot of times, it happens every time.
Yes, except when they're drumming. We don't know about it when they're drumming. It's a little harder to study. Drumming is the sound the woodpecker makes when it's courting. It goes real fast like that. So it's a little hard to study that. I can't imagine that would happen in that example. But when it's hammering on the tree, it pulses like that. Woodpeckers also have a very thick eyelid and a very thick nictitating membrane. That's sometimes called the third eyelid. Okay? Those of a woodpecker are very thick. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is it helps hold the eye in the orbital socket. It also protects the eye when a woodpecker is hammering on a tree and this material is coming back in its face. Okay? And then for some birds, some woodpeckers, most woodpeckers, when they feed their young, they feed directly, which means the adult has the food in its bill, and it turns its head to the side and hands the food off to the baby. Okay? But there are a few species that feed by regurgitating. So they have to stick their head all the way into the bill of the nestling. And with a flicker, you can see that thick eyelid is very important. Okay? Flicker and lineated both feed by regurgitating. Probably pale-billed too, actually. Okay, we're still in the head. We're almost done with the head. Okay? So the tongue of the woodpecker has fascinated artists and naturalists for centuries. And this is the first known drawing of the woodpecker tongue. Okay? It shows the tongue here, how it comes around and wraps around the head. Some woodpeckers have a muscle that comes and wraps around the trachea. Okay? And woodpeckers have special, we have a hyoid bone, okay? Back here, our tongue is attached to it. And it's the only bone in the human body that doesn't have a joint. Okay, so it's by itself and it helps you stick your tongue out. Hyoid bone, one bone. Woodpeckers have a hyoid apparatus. And that starts with the bony material. Now, these birds are related to woodpeckers. They're in the same order, the Pisiformes. Okay? This is a red-headed barbet from South America, and a keel-billed toucan, Central America, and a Lafresnae's piculet from South America. Okay? The piculet is more closely related to the woodpecker. He's in the woodpecker family. These guys are only in the woodpecker order. But here's the tongue of the barbet, and here's the tongue of a toucan. You can see the specialization went a huge step. It wasn't just a little bit different. It jumped a very large step. This is the bony part of a flicker's tongue. And it's not just one bone. It's a bone here, a set of fused bones right here, a set of fused bones here, a bone here, and a bone here. So multiple bones. And it's a Y shape. So take this and make it go on this side too, just like this piculet. The piculet obviously is smaller, but has a similar tongue structure. There's the hyoid apparatus. Now I won't quiz you, test you on the names of the muscles and the bones. Okay, the only thing I want you to get out of this is the complicated nature of the whole thing that's working inside the woodpecker's head. There are special muscles that wrap around these bones. This muscle here wraps around this bone and helps extend the tongue. There's a muscle up here that helps retract the tongue. There's another muscle here that helps wiggle the tip of the tongue inside while it's looking for the prey. And there are special muscles that attach down here below the trachea, again, to help redirect forces. And this is how the hyoid fits into the skull. Remember, it's a Y shape. So in the bill is the straight part. It goes back, it splits at the trachea and esophagus, and goes around the back of the head, outside the cranium, goes over the top of the head and ends right here by the eye socket. Okay? And every time that woodpecker sticks out its tongue, that whole thing unwinds and rewinds. The whole thing, constantly doing that. Okay? And that can happen many times a second. Sort of like a sewing machine, if you will. Alright? This picture just shows the bone. The bony part. Okay, because this is a digital, sort of like an X-ray, a CT scan of a gold-fronted woodpecker skull. Then, beside the bone and muscles that make up the hyoid apparatus, there's the fleshy part of the tongue. Okay, we didn't even mention that yet. So, flickers happen to have a very long, fleshy part of their tongue. Their whole thing is long. I'll show you this picture in a second. Look at that. This is a flicker's hyoid bone. Okay? So most woodpeckers' hyoid bones stop right here. The flicker, his tongue goes from here at the tip, all the way around the back, all the way past the eye, and into the nasal opening. So all the way around and into the nose. And again, every time he sticks out his tongue, that whole thing winds and unwinds. That makes my nose hurt. Every time I look at that picture. That's just... Oh, that reminds me of COVID. When they stuck the thing up your nose, you know, and you're like, that's exactly what that reminds me of. So this is the fleshy part of the tongue. When you see a woodpecker's tongue, you're seeing that pink part, just the fleshy part. Remember, it is surrounding part of that outer hyoid bone. Okay? And not only do all woodpeckers have a hyoid apparatus, but most genera have different flesh parts of their tongues adapted for their special types of feeding. The Lewis's woodpecker, which you may not think is a Mexican woodpecker, but there are probably a few dozen records of Lewis's woodpecker coming down. Besides, this is the only picture I have of a woodpecker catching an insect in the air. So that's my excuse for using a Lewis's woodpecker. This is mostly a U.S. species. This bird catches aerial insects. That's its main feeding behavior. It doesn't hammer into trees. He's a weak excavator. He doesn't have that robust anatomy like they have in beauty excavators. And his tongue just has these messy keratinous, you know, the fingernail? Okay, that's the material. And it's very thick tongue. And that helps the bird retract the prey, and it helps it hold the prey in its bill while it opens the bill and catches more prey. Okay, so it's got to be able to hold sometimes a pretty big insect in there while it opens its mouth to catch another one. The flicker feeds on the ground. Okay, you've got two flickers here in Mexico, the gilded flicker, actually you have three. The gilded flicker, the northern flicker, and the Guatemalan flicker. And they all are fairly similar in the way they feed. They eat mostly, anybody know what they eat? Say it. Who said it?
Yo.
Say it loud.
Hormigas.
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 Hormigas? Hormigas. Ants. The flickers eat more ants than any bird in North America. And they're feeding in underground ant burrows. So they don't need these things at the tip. Instead, they have the bumpy section, which increases the surface area, and they have big salivary glands that coat the tongue with sticky saliva. And they stick that tongue down, and the ants basically get glued to the tongue when retracted. Okay? Specialized feeding, specialized adaptations. The sapsuckers, they only have to get their tongues like this deep into the tree. Okay? They don't have to have a long tongue at all. They just have to get into the sap wells. But in order to collect sap, they have a little paintbrush at the tip of their tongue. Okay, those little pieces there stick out, directly out from the tip. So they take that tongue and they stick it into that hole where they drill for sap and swoosh it around to collect sap and retract. Okay? The Arizona woodpecker is one of the heavy-duty excavators. Okay? This is one of the species that can bore into the wood to get its prey. In order to do that, the tongue tip has to be very narrow. And the end of the tongue tip has barbs sticking out, pointing backward, back toward the bird, like a fish hook. Okay? Anybody who fishes knows a fish hook has a little barb on it. What the bird does then is it sticks its tongue into the larval gallery. Remember the hairy we saw? It sticks it into the tunnel and between the wall of the gallery and the larva, like that, and pulls back. And those hooks hook onto the outside of the larva and retract it from the tunnel. Okay, we're done with the head. Okay. We're actually done with the whole skeleton. We can just relax. Yeah. We're going to talk about feet, just briefly, okay? So, this is a ladder-backed woodpecker, and I want you to notice the position of the toes. We're going to talk about that, okay? So, the woodpeckers that climb, that spend their lives in the vertical plane, are going to be different in how they hold the tree than the woodpeckers that spend more time on the ground and hopping around differently. If you look in the biology books, and we look at birds and look at the descriptions of their structure, most of those books, in fact, I bet if you could show me a biology book that doesn't call those toes zygodactyl, I want you to tell me. Okay, so we just tend to call woodpecker's toes zygodactyl. That means 2 toes forward and 2 toes back. Okay, the problem with that for woodpeckers is when you're climbing a tree, you don't want 2 toes down here, right? Anybody rock climb? Anybody ever been rock climbing? Okay, well, trust me, when you're climbing, you're holding like this, okay, to oppose gravity, right? And maybe out to here. So in this like 45-degree angle here, is that 90? That's 90 degree angle, okay? So take a look here. 2 toes and 2 toes on the flicker. So that is a perching adaptation, like a songbird that has 3 forward and 1 back. Okay, that's a perching adaptation, not a climbing adaptation. So the woodpeckers that spend more time climbing, more time in the vertical plane, have special toes. I want you to watch. I'm going to show you a sequence of this hairy woodpecker. Look at the toe formation. 2 forward, real close to each other. 1 out to the side and 1 down below. 3 forward and 1 not even being used. It's right, well, a little bit, right there. See it? It's actually working. It's forward too, almost 4 toes forward. And all 4 out to the side. This is what we call ectropodactyl. Okay? That means that outer toe is movable. So they have special muscles and a special joint in their foot that allows them to swing that toe around, to be flexible in how they grab the surface. So you remember that bladderback we saw at the very beginning had all 4 toes forward because he was doing it real tight to that tree as he was climbing. And here's a good example of a larger woodpecker and how they can hang onto the tree. 4 toes. 3 here. 1, 2, 3. The 4th one is in here and it's lying flat against the tree. It doesn't even use that 4th toe. There are some woodpeckers in the world, some in north of here in North America, that only have 3 toes because they spend their entire lives in the vertical plane. So they never needed the 4th toe. So they didn't evolve with a fourth toe. They only have 3. The last thing about the feet is the claws of a woodpecker are very sharp and they're very strongly hooked. So this is a woodpecker, this is more like a songbird. The typical claw or toenail, if you will. And I want you to look at those toenails on that pale-billed woodpecker. Those are formidable claws. And look at the curve on them. And the pale-billed woodpecker, like other Campethalus genus woodpeckers, often has all 4 toes out. We call that a pamprodactyl toe formation, but it's what we call, it's kind of a modified pamprodactyl. Pamprodactyl is what swifts have, with 4 toes forward like this. So swifts have to perch in a tree, inside a tree, or in a chimney, or in a cave, on the wall of a cave. They have to hold on like this. So pamprodactyl is when you have 4 toes on the same plane. Okay, also on the outside of the bird, we have plumage adaptation. This is an example of different subspecies of hairy woodpecker and how the eastern species are heavily spotted and the western species are not. And in the eastern U.S. especially, actually probably in the eastern Mexico also, the light under the canopy is more dappled. I don't know how to say that. I've never heard that word. Filtered, more filtered. Lots of little sunbeams coming down. So this is a better camouflage when you're inside the canopy. And in the west, the forests are usually bigger and darker. So those birds have darker wings and fewer white spots. Too much white on a bird in a dark canopy is going to give you away to prey, make you easier to catch. Woodpeckers, the heavy-duty excavators, the hairy, also have these puffy little feathers here called nasal tufts. Those those sit over those nasal openings and protect material from going down into the nasal openings. The woodpeckers that don't do the heavy-duty excavation have barely any nasal tufts. And look, you can see the nasal openings on this bird. There's nothing protecting it. But this bird's just gleaning and picking prey and collecting stuff from the surface. So it doesn't need to protect those nasal openings. Okay, here we are. Look at that tail. This is a red-naped sapsucker. It's another wintering bird in Mexico, mostly in the mountains. But I want you to focus on the tail. Look how the tail is propped against the tree. The main adaptation there, besides the pygostyle at the bottom of the backbone, is the stiff shaft of the feather. Okay? When it pushes that tail up against, those feathers don't flex very much at all. Okay? If they were typical feathers, they would just fold down like that. And they wouldn't be able to get the leverage that they need. Woodpeckers have fewer barbs at the tip, because if they grew barbs down at the tip, they would just wear off when the birds are constantly climbing. Okay, so very few barbs at the tip and a very strong feather shaft. Another interesting thing about woodpeckers, these are baby woodpeckers, I think you probably figured that out. What do you see missing from baby woodpeckers that other baby birds would have?
Feathers.
What kind of feathers?
Fluffy feathers.
Yeah, that's right. The English word is down. Down feathers. Woodpeckers don't grow down. Most other birds have down feathers. Those give insulation for those birds. Okay? So when they're out in the elements, they're protected from the outside temperature. Woodpeckers don't grow down. Even the babies, even the adults, none of them. One of the reasons we believe that is that, first of all, it saves energy. You don't have to grow a whole different set of feathers. You gotta get out of that cavity. Plus, being in the cavity is good insulation. So you don't need the protection from the elements that other birds need. Okay? Did I get that right?
No.
Is it close?
Very good. Nice try.
It's close, good try. So, woodpeckers are cool, right?
Son chidos.
So cute. So what? So lots of birds are cool, right? Hummingbirds are pretty cool. Penguins are cool. They all have their own adaptations that are pretty cool, but woodpeckers are cooler. Woodpeckers play key roles in the forest. Okay, remember we were talking about naming structures. What do you call this right here? An arch. Thank you. An arch. And in the arch we have this piece right here. You know what that's called? The keystone. Don't ask me to translate that.
Good language.
I'm going to write that down. What happens if you take the arch out of it, the keystone out of an arch? It collapses. Okay? There are certain animals and even plants that we call keystone organisms. Okay? What does that mean? Now, I was going to translate these, but I just left them because I know you're scientists and you can get it. Okay? What is a keystone species? A species that has a disproportionately large effect compared to its abundance. So, a small number of woodpeckers have a big impact on the forest. Okay, put another way, there are many species that depend upon woodpeckers in disproportion to the amount of woodpeckers. Way more other species depend on woodpeckers. Okay? And if you took that woodpecker out of the ecosystem, all those species that depend on woodpeckers would lose their livelihoods. Okay? What is a woodpecker? This is one of my favorite Mexican woodpeckers, another endemic. You guys seen that one? Gray-breasted, down in Oaxaca. Beautiful bird, loves cactus. What is a woodpecker's primary keystone role? They have a couple. We'll go into the details of the other ones, the lesser roles, but primary keystone role. It has to do with this bird, right here. And this bird, well, that was an elegant trogon, by the way. This is a nutting's flycatcher. It has to do with this bird, Brutus papillon. What's the connection between all those birds? They're cavity nesters. Okay? They're cavity nesters. Cavity nesters need woodpeckers. In Mexico, there are more than 40 species of birds that nest in woodpecker cavities. Now, in many cases, especially in the rainforest, those birds might be able to excavate their own cavity. But especially when you get away from the more rotten type, I'm going to run that again. Wood, you need the woodpeckers to excavate these cavities for these birds. Yes, even the black-bellied whistling duck nests in trees. Now, they'll often nest in a rotten tree that has a big opening, but they too will nest in a pileated or a lineated cavity or a pale-billed cavity. Okay? All those species, and that doesn't even count all of the parrots and parakeets, most of which are cavity nesters. So you have lots of woodpeckers in Mexico, I think 25 species. So there's a lot of excavating going on out there. The black-cheeked woodpecker is one of your rainforest species. The golden olive is kind of a Sierra Madre Oriental and down all the way into Central and South America. The Velasquez woodpecker, which is a subspecies of golden fronted, is Yucatan and kind of down into Honduras. And one of my favorites, very favorites, is the smoky brown woodpecker. Super cute. Really small, but guess what? He's small, but he's mighty.
Mighty.
Forte. Okay? He's one of the heavy-duty excavators. Okay? He excavates a lot of cavities. And then those other woodpeckers come the next year and open up that cavity and make it bigger as they're bigger, and they open up the inside. And they owe that to the smoky environment. So you've got a lot of woodpeckers having a big impact on a lot of species of birds. So anything that you can do for woodpecker conservation is going to help the ecological balance in your forests and woodlands. Retaining snags is a very important part of that. Keeping dead trees instead of taking them out. Just take them, you can cut them up high, and then the woodpeckers can still, and the larvae, the beetle larvae can still get in there. They can provide homes and food. There are a lot of things you can do. The main thing to do, besides retaining snags, is the snag is a dead tree. That's just lay that out. The other thing is to maintain a broad succession of age classes in the forest. A forest needs seedlings, saplings, small trees, medium trees, large trees, old mature trees, dead trees, and down trees. A healthy forest has all of those things. And if you go into a forest, like a pine forest that was cut over once, you'll see they replanted, probably, most likely, but all the trees are the same age. So it's not the ecological diversity that that forest would have if it had the broad diversity of age classes. So if you want to talk more about conservation of woodpeckers, you can get in touch with me. But mostly, thank you. I appreciate you coming very much.